Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charlie Mann of law firm Alchemy. I have a totally different guest here today, someone who deals with a side of running a business that I personally dread because I'm a let's just see how much money is in the piggy bank type of person. Is it enough? And not in the worst way. I'll be honest, not in the worst way. I might be exaggerating for effect. But hopefully she'll be able to help all of us get better about one of the three parts of running a business that a lot of us don't know a lot about. You know, there's marketing, there's operations, and there's finance. To me, we can boil it down to those three. Hopefully we've got someone who can cure our financial ills today. So very happy to have not only a conversation about that, but a get-to-know-you conversation with Leah Miller. Leah, welcome to the show.
What? Hello. I'm so excited to talk about the finance part, and you are not wrong in that that is the one thing that most business owners dread because they're the creatives, the entrepreneurs, and they just, as long as there's enough money, that's all they care about.
Truly. I have some wild stories I'm sure that we'll get into here, but I'm sure it's going to have something to do with finance, but I still got to ask the question, what's the one thing they don't teach you in law school?
They do not teach you how to read a financial statement.
They don't,
so that you
do
can
they?
run your business.
Well,
No. Balance sheet, profit and loss, statement of cash flows. Not many people are familiar with those.
Okay, so we're going to have to break some of those things down because I think there's a massive gap in the market. And every now and then I run into a law firm owner whose like main focus is they look at the financial documents, but that's maybe 1 in 8 at most who really love the financial side. So look, I'm a guy who loves marketing. Secondary would be operations. In finance, like I mentioned at the beginning, is just it's the third tier thing for me. What drove you in that direction?
I have always loved numbers and talking about numbers and the finance part of everything. I've kind of always geeked out about taxes and things like that. And so
oh no.
I was a firm administrator for a personal injury law firm for 8 years. I started as a paralegal and then worked my way up to firm administrator, and had the title of CFO. And so I kind of just ran everything, and I've always loved to really understand the money part of it. And, can we afford this? What does it look like in the future? What does our cash flow look like in the future? And things like that. And now that I'm working with many law firms in my own business, I find that that is the last thing that people really think about is the financial part of it. If the money's coming in and the cases are coming in and there's enough money to make payroll, then people really aren't worried about it. But there's a lot more to it than that when making strategic decisions in the marketing, the operations, and the finance part of running your law firm.
So in a PI firm in particular, I coach a lot of PI firm owners, but I also work with estate planners, criminal defense, family law. Those would be the main 4 practice areas. So for PI firms, though, the money thing is arguably more difficult in many ways because you're trying to project revenue for the future, and all the accounting that you're doing for today is about work that you've acquired in the past. I'm really curious inside of that firm, mask it in whatever you need to, but working with PI firms in particular, what are some of the biggest problems that you have to solve for them?
So I think the biggest thing is and I say this to a lot of people because I have some clients that are outside of the law firm industry, and if they need money this week, they can go out, and like I have a landscaping company, they can go out and hustle some business and make whatever money they need. In law firms and PI in particular, things are 12 to 18 months out for most everything, especially big cases. If you're having to go to trial and things like that, plus you have the side where you are fronting the costs for that. And so not only do you not have the income coming in from that case you're working on right now, you may have to put out tens of thousands of dollars in costs before you recoup that as well. And so being able to kind of know how much you have coming down the line, we used to have meetings, and as you've done it for 10, 20, 30 years, you can kind of estimate how much a case is going to be worth. But that can change also. We had cases that may have just been $10,000, $20,000 cases that turn into $1 million cases, when a client goes and sees a doctor and has surgery. And it can be flipped the other way around. You can have a case that you think is going to be a 6-7 figure case, and you get 6 months down the road and something changes, or your client tells you something that they didn't tell you before, or, things like that. And all of a sudden, that $1 million case that you think you have is worth $10,000, and that may be extreme, but that happens. And so really having a firm understanding of your operating costs, your variable expenses that happen, things like that, can help you navigate those peaks and valleys, because in a PI firm, sometimes it's really, really good, and other times it's really, really bad.
Yeah.
And then there's other things that can disrupt that, where things may change in the firm. You have people coming and going. And so if that disrupts your 12 to 18 month cycle, then that can kind of change your cash flow as well. If a big client leaves for some reason, and that goes into the operations and things like that, then that's money that you thought you were going to have that you may not have. And so just having a firm understanding of more than, is there enough money in the bank to make payroll, can help you make those decisions of how to handle the law firm.
So if you're like airdropped into a firm that's a PI firm doing, we'll call it $2 million a year, maybe $3 million a year, what's the usual situation that you're looking at, and what are some of the first steps that you're taking to get someone organized?
So my first step, and this goes back to the basics, and I'm finding that it's missing in a lot of ways, is what does your bookkeeping and your accounting even look like? And that's something that's kind of how I got started in a lot of this, is I offer that as well within my firm. And so what does your bookkeeping and your accounting look like? And I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, my CPA handles it. And your CPA is needed for tax reasons and other reasons like that, but they're not always handling your bookkeeping and accounting in a way that you're going to use it to make those strategic decisions in the future. So there's more to your bookkeeping than just what is needed for tax reasons and compliance. And so that's like where I want to start in the basic is, are we keeping track of everything on our profit and loss in a way where we can make those decisions? I see a lot of times wages are just included in wages, and we're not splitting out officer wages, associate attorney wages, paralegal wages. Like we can break those things down, so we're seeing where that money is really going, as well as, are we recouping all of those case costs? When people, PI firms, I see they're getting their check at the end for their fees and costs, and they're not splitting out the fees and costs. And that goes with other, estate planning and things like that, is we want to make sure we're seeing how much of those costs we're recouping and how much is fees that we're recouping. So I think that's basic, is, are we in a spot where we have good bookkeeping and accounting happening so that we can move up and make those decisions? And then the next thing is, what are your goals? I have some clients that are like, I just want to be comfortable. I want my one paralegal who's amazing. And you know what? That's fine if that's all your goal is.
Yes.
But I have other clients who are, I want to hire an associate attorney, a paralegal. I want to offer this culture in my firm, and all of that takes money.
Yep.
And so we start with, what are those goals, and what do we have to do to get to those goals? And so, then we set a budget. And what does our budget look like? Well, if we're in the negative every month and we're not even hitting our break-even point, then we need to fix that before we can talk about hiring that attorney, hiring that paralegal.
Right.
And I think things like that really matter, again, in the personal injury world, because you're going to bring on an attorney who's going to generate revenue for you, more revenue, that's the goal. But what they're bringing in today, you aren't going to see realized for 12 to 18 months. And so you have to make sure you have the cash flow to carry that until those cases they're personally bringing in are generating that revenue. And so that's kind of the basic is bookkeeping.
So this is a huge thing that gets discussed, especially in the PI firms, but honestly, in any firm. I'm sure you get the question. I know I get the question. It's how do I pay an associate? How much should be put into, bonus structures? How do I deal with the fact that, especially in a PI firm, the recognition of the work that they do is going to be 12, 18 months? When do I invest? Like, when you get that sort of amorphous blob of a hiring question, what's your thought process? Like, what are you sorting through? How do you help someone make the right choice?
Well, going back to the basics of, can you afford to give those bonuses? And I'm a big believer in bonuses. I was blessed with a boss in the past who was very generous in sharing all of that. And so I'm a big believer in that. But you have to make sure you have enough to keep the firm going and running. And then just looking at what are people producing. And, you have to give that incentive to those associate attorneys. And it doesn't have to be just on cases that they are bringing in and producing 12 to 18 months down the road. Are they stepping up and helping with the cases that are, happening now? And so knowing your cash flow can help you determine, are you able to be generous? You may have $1 million case that settles.
Yeah.
But if all of those fees have to go to your overhead, your debt, whatever it may be, you can't automatically give bonuses to that. And so being aware of that and having a handle on your expenses so that you have that margin to be generous is really important.
Okay, so dealing with the whole bonus thing, like you mentioned, how can we bonus them a little bit earlier on maybe versus later on? Let's talk about the framework of complexity in finance, because I think that this is one of the big hurdles that a lot of firm owners face down is the finance area, especially if we're talking about incentives, but even just getting into the minutia of what's being spent on certain marketing campaigns. How are we attributing cost to the value that it generates? Is there such a thing as too complex when it comes to looking at your finances, especially for a smaller firm, or do you try and get people on a complex pattern early on?
I think keeping it basic and things like that. I try to set like key performance indicators. We talk about KPIs a lot, so that we can kind of break it down into that marketing and those bonuses and what people are producing. I don't think you need to make it too complex when it comes to things like that, because as long as we're like getting that data and we're keeping track of it, then we can kind of, spread the money where it needs to be. And so when you talk about the marketing, are we tracking data of, is that marketing bringing in business revenue, or is it money that's going someplace that it doesn't need to go? And so I think it can get complex in the sense that we need to track the data and, make sure that the money's going to the right places. But if we have a understanding of the money, and I think all firm owners, it's good to hire people that can go over those things with you, like a CFO and things like that. But you need to have an understanding of it, a basic understanding of it as well, so that you know where the money's going and if it's being spent in a way that it needs to be spent. And there needs to be a system to it. And to bonuses and marketing and things like that, because you just can't be like, oh, we got, this much money in today, everybody gets $10,000 and we're going to go spend this money. Well, no, do you need that in the future? So back to complexity, I think it does get complex in the fact that it can be overwhelming to some people because it's finances.
Yeah.
But if you have a good system in place, it doesn't have to have that complex, overwhelming feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so let's talk documents, because one of the stories I want to talk about is there was a guy who I coached for a while who, when we started coaching, he was 57 years old. He had owned his firm for about 20 years. He looked at his P&L, like full-on actual P&L, for the first time ever. He had never actually spent any time previously with his P&L. It was just money in the bank, right? Now, he had an arrangement where he had partners on the other side of the practice. They were different practice areas operating as separate business units. He just knew what was coming in, what was coming out, never bothered to look deep into the P&L. Yep. It's not as uncommon as people think that the P&L is not paid a lot of attention to. It is seemingly an easy document to utilize and also a remarkably complex document to utilize. Be really curious for the folks who are listening to this. What are the most what are people not using their P&L for, or what information are they not better utilizing from the P&L? What should they be doing with it that they're not?
Well, I think going back to the basics of, is your P&L even giving you the information you need? And so that goes back to, we used to say all the time, my old boss used to say, garbage in, garbage out. You put the wrong information in your system, you're going to get the wrong information out. So that goes back to basic bookkeeping and accounting so that we can see where all of our money is going. And so that's what the P&L is for people who may not have ever looked at one. It shows your gross revenue, all of your expenses, your net profit at the bottom. And so I think organizing the P&L in a way so that it's easily digestible and you can look at it and say, oh, we spent $15,000 this month on marketing, or whatever it may be. And so I think once you get that organized and you're looking at it, it's good to periodically look at those expenses and see, are we spending money where it needs to be spent? And not just on marketing, office supplies and things like that. Are we, meals and entertainment and all of that? There's a lot of different parts on there that you just need to periodically look at it and say, do we need to be spending that money on that? Because we could cut back in some places, or we can, change some of our marketing stuff and use that money in a better place. And I also think I like to do on the P&L is looking at our case costs, because again, in a PI firm or most firms, you're putting those costs out. And that's money also out of the client's pocket in the end. And so are we utilizing our case costs in the right way? For our clients, because we don't want to spend clients' money in a, way that's going to make them lose money if it's not needed on the case. Because bottom line is the clients, if they're happy and what they get is most important for everything. And so if that's that should be broken down on the P&L as well as like what we're spending on case costs and all of that. So I think it can just be, go ahead.
Well, if you're sitting down, let's imagine for a moment I have a mild level of sophistication in finance, right? We'll pretend we're going to really go out in the realm of fantasy here. But let's say I actually have like my P&L relatively organized. It's been done well by a previous maybe bookkeeping, accounting arrangement. You're coming in as a fractional CFO. And what are some of the things when you go through the P&L are common wins that you can find for a law firm? And I'm not necessarily talking, it could be reducing expenses or whatever it is, but just data wins, information wins, ideation, strategy, expense reduction. Like, what are some of the practical initial wins that you look for?
So, like I mentioned earlier, I like to split out the wages because we want to see where our wage money is going to. So if it's all lumped together, what are we spending on our associate attorneys? What are we spending on our paralegals? I don't necessarily break down paralegal, legal assistant, receptionist, but you can.
Right.
Because those may be places where we may want to spend more money on a paralegal. Like a good paralegal is worth their weight in gold.
Yes.
And so we may want to spend more there. And so breaking down those wages and seeing where those wages are going is super important for me when looking at a profit and loss. And so that's a big thing because I feel like a lot of times people can become weighed down by the wages and they're if you're not producing enough to sustain all of these employees, of course we want to keep our employees. I don't ever want to get rid of employees. But that can be a way where people are losing money a lot of times. And so do we need to even look at not getting rid of those employees, but shifting their duties around? And that goes to the operations standpoint, where operations can look and say, like, man, we're losing a lot of money over with our paralegals. Do we need to shift around the way that we're doing work on those? Another big thing I'm big on with profit and loss is I like to, if you're in a firm that does more than one practice area, or even in an estate firm, they offer different services. I like to break down all of the services for revenue because we can look at, is our estate planning generating a lot more money than our guardianship? Do we need to talk about getting rid of guardianship? Do we need to talk about, increasing our marketing for our estate planning?
Right.
Do we need to bring on a contract attorney to handle more of that? So that's a big one on the profit and loss, is breaking down that revenue by practice area. And that's when we go back to those KPIs and tracking. We can track, the revenue by practice area and kind of make strategic decisions on that when it comes to how we're doing operations and marketing.
Okay, so you use the term contract attorney, and I'm absolutely delighted that you did, because I think there are a lot of opportunities for firm owners to be, especially firm owners that are scaling, right? They're in their early, mid six-figure journey. They're heading to their first million, or even honestly, the folks who are moving from $1 million to $3 million, say, and they don't just have willy-nilly, let's go hire us an attorney, let's go hire us this. What are some of the, like a contract attorney, financially efficient ways to scale a practice that you've seen?
This is big for me because people, they say, well, I have to pay this attorney $75,000 a year. Well, there's a lot more to just base salary to bring on a full-time W-2 employee. And I don't think a lot of people realize that sometimes because they're not familiar with their profit and loss and their financials. And so they don't understand that extra cost in money and time to train somebody. And so I think bringing on a contracted attorney where you can afford somebody that has more experience, that you don't have to take your time, because your time is worth money, to train them on you have to train them on your processes, but you don't have to train them as if you're hiring a new, just out of law school attorney. You can hire them on a fractional basis and help that scale your practice. Same with the virtual paralegals. And I never really got into it much when I was at my firm, and now that I'm out on my own and I'm on LinkedIn a lot and all of that, there's a whole world out there of these virtual paralegals who are amazing at what they do. They've been doing it for years, and you can get it at a fraction of a cost, and you can get people who are more experienced. I'm still big on hiring locally if that's what you do, but that can, like you said, that can help bridge you to being able to afford that other attorney. Or if you want to hire a fresh out of law school attorney that you're going to have to take the time to train, that takes away your time from doing other things. So that's when you can bring on that contract attorney who can kind of, pick up some of that work. And that's really helpful, I find, in the estate planning firms and things like that, where it's a lot more just generating documents and things like that, and not so much, and it's kind of hard in a personal injury firm because you've got a 12 to 18 month case. It's hard to bring somebody on, but
that's where we can look at the co-counsel model. If you're not confident in certain places, you don't want to do the product liability, but you want to keep it in-house. Grab co-counsel. You don't need to hire a lawyer for that, right? There's all that.
And that's kind of things that we used to do, especially if you're learning a new part of personal injury or whatever it may be. It looks great, and you see the guys who do the big trucking cases and they're making millions and millions of dollars, or the big medical malpractice cases and they're making millions and millions of dollars. But there's a huge learning curve when it comes to all of that. It's a whole new set of law, especially with medical malpractice and things like that. And so bringing on that co-counsel or a contract attorney that, one, can do things at a cost-efficient way to help scale your business, and two, you can learn from, because I think I'm big on always learning, continuing to learn all the time from everybody around you.
So let me help everyone learn real quick, because some folks are going to get to this point and, we drop the term fractional CFO. It's a question that I get from clients, and maybe you can help give a definitive answer, or at least a very helpful answer here, which is, what does a fractional CFO do?
So a fractional CFO looks at the future of your financials. So like I said earlier, you have a CPA, they do your taxes, they look at your past. Bookkeepers look at your past, they make sure your accounting's good. A CFO is going to look at your future. And so for those firms, like you mentioned, who are just getting into that first million or even getting to that 3 million, a full-time CFO will cost you a lot of money. But having somebody on a fractional basis who can do that budgeting, work on those KPIs, do your cash flow forecasting, and help you know what's coming in the future. We can look at 6 months from now. What do we expect your cash flow to look like? Okay, great. You have the cash flow to sustain hiring that associate attorney you want to hire. who is going to then get you to that next 3 million. Or we can look at your cash flow and say, right now is just not the time to do that. Maybe we need to make some other changes. And in 6 months, let's reevaluate. Are we ready to bring on that new associate attorney or that paralegal or, whatever it may be? And so it really helps the attorney who is running their firm make strategic decisions on the future of their firm, on that growth that you want to do, and helps you break down the financial statements and read those financial statements, look at the profit and loss and the balance sheet and the statement of cash flows, and understand where, more of the financial stuff, because it is something that a lot of people don't understand, or it's overwhelming and they don't want to take the time.
So what's the balance? I mean, look, a lot of firms that I'm working with, they are growing firms. They have growing levels of resources. What's the balance for someone in your position of saying yes versus saying no when perhaps the attorney says, hey, can we do this? Should we do this? Like, how much are you yesing versus knowing?
It really depends. I have some clients who are in growth phases, and, they can bring on the one attorney, but we need to, reach some goals before we, bring on another one. And we just want to make sure we're going to have that buffer where you're not stressing about making payroll next week. And I think a lot of times, I work with some solo attorneys who are kind of bringing on their first W-2 employees, and you go from, I only need to make this much money to sustain my bills, my personal bills, to you have to take care of other people. And so,
Yes.
We want to make sure that we're leaving a buffer of cash flow, and, we're not overextending ourselves, and that there's ways we can pull back if we need to. If we decide to bring on that other attorney and the cash flow doesn't really work out the way we thought, because it's not an exact science at all. It's it's an estimate. Things can change. Like I said, that $1 million case can go to $10,000 overnight.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that there's enough margin in our other expenses that we can pull back. If we don't want to have to let go of an attorney, do we pull back a little bit somewhere else on, spending more marketing money and all of that, if that's what we need to do, as we're making those new hires? Or do we need to bring somebody on as a contract right now, and then eventually, bring them on full time in the future? What kind of benefits are we going to offer? That kind of goes hand in hand. And I feel like right now there's a huge shift in culture in firms and businesses overall. And there's a huge shift in what is offered for paid time off and benefits and things like that. I feel like COVID kind of started that shift big time. And also our generation is demanding more when it comes to that in a good way. And so looking at your finances and knowing that you're offering a really good benefit package today, are you going to be able to offer that a year from now if you bring on more staff? And so just making sure that we find that balance.
So why is, let's dig into this, Leah. Why is it so hard for firms to, because I joke about a level of financial quote unquote illiteracy, but I'm also not. Truth is, I'm not afraid of the stuff, and I know a little bit more than I let on. I'm not a complete buffoon here. I think it does surprise me at times when firm owners have some expression of fear, doubt, or confusion about projecting the future. I also understand it as well. I'm empathetic to it, but I'm still searching for what might be the root cause. Why is it that the forward-facing financial projections are a sticking point for many? What do you think?
I think a lot of it's fear and just not understanding it. And I don't think it's just fear of not having enough. I think it's fear of having more than you've ever had before, because there is the potential to have to manage, if you're making mid six figures right now and you're bringing on those first employees and kind of growing, the thought of having to manage, seven figures, $1 million, $3 million some of
right?
that may be where the fear comes as well, because you're not, you know, you're just not familiar with it. And I find a lot of people, and attorneys especially, they may come from backgrounds that don't have those kind of means.
Oh, for
You know,
sure.
attorneys are pretty scrappy. They can get their get themselves through law school,
Oh yeah,
and so I think it's just fear of the unknown, and just not understanding it so much,
yeah,
and also having to take the time away from their practice of law. They went to law school because they wanted to practice law, not, you know, they didn't go to business school with a, you know, to set out and run a business. And I think I'm finding a lot of my clients are struggling with that balance, and I'm sure you
yeah,
find that as well,
yeah.
of, you know, how much time do I take to run my business, and how much time do I take to do practice law, because that's obviously why they got into it.
You know, I talked about the whole marketing, operations, finance triangle, and the thing I sort of say, and I did an episode, like a little mini episode recently about it, is the job of marketing is to create issues for operations by bringing a ton of clients that overwhelm operations. As operations gets overwhelmed, they're looking to finance now to solve the staffing problem, and then as they solve the staffing problem, their job is to look back at marketing and go, okay, you need to start bringing in more clients, we're up in the projections. And like the whole point of owning a business is to cause trouble for the next stage as we go along. But I was even talking with a coaching client yesterday, and I find this true, is the easiest thing to get excited about for most entrepreneurial types is marketing. It's acquisition of clients. It's the ability to then, when you acquire those clients, do what you set out to do, right? To deliver the service. And then we get interested in operations, right? It's fun to tinker with your product. That's
Yep.
enjoyable. But then instead of dropping into the finance space, they want to skip right back to marketing. What problems are people causing for themselves by skipping the finance area?
I think it brings a lot more stress to them than it needs to. You know, if we're not skipping that finance area and we're taking the time to understand it, I mean, a lot of these people, you're, like you said, your coaching client is 54 and never looked at a profit and loss before. Obviously, he has the cash flow. That's not an issue.
Oh yeah.
But did he know that all along? Was it ever a stressful time of, you know, overthinking of decisions you're making? And so I feel like understanding the finances can be a tool that can be used, and not a scary, you know, thing that you just want to ignore because nobody wants to, you know, think about having to pay the bills and things like that.
Yeah.
It's always been
Yeah.
talked about like a, oh no, the bill collector's coming to my door, or
Yep.
the check's in the mail, or I don't, you know, people don't want to have to go and pursue clients and ask for the money or follow up on an invoice or anything like that. Like, it's always been such a taboo subject with people
For sure.
that I think if you just take the time to understand it, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it once you have that understanding. And if you get that process in place and you hire the right people to help you with that
That's true.
process,
That's true.
it can be an hour meeting once a month
Yep.
of, hey, this is good, and now I know I can go make that strategic decision, instead of stressing about it for a whole week on, am I making the right decision? You know, I think it can bring peace to people if they really take the time to understand it.
That's a really good point. It's not a set it and forget it. Nothing is actually ever set it and forget it. Even automated email sequences are not truly full on set it and forget it, right? You got to check
Yeah.
in. You got to make
Yeah.
sure they're working as you expect.
Yeah.
Same thing with finance. I do think that is a really good point that you bring up, Leah. Is the idea of, if you put in the work, you can continue to, like, if you put in the work now to set up the right systems for it. Now, as a firm evolves, what layers sometimes get added to the finance area that maybe don't crop up when you're a $500,000 firm? Does this increase in complexity, staffing wise, systems wise, et cetera?
Yeah, it does, because you're going to be hiring more staff, and you're going to be adding different tiers of staff. As we talked about before, that bonus structure is going to change, because you're going to have, you know, your senior partners and you're going to have your interns and your associates at the bottom. I feel like there's going, as you grow, there's that with the paralegals and your support staff as well. And so there's complexity on where we get into with the bonus structure, with the partnerships, bringing on a partner, how we pay, different bonuses and percentages and things like that. And so that's why I'm big on like having that firm foundation of understanding those finances. And if you're up in that, higher up seven figure, it's never too late to start. But if you're if you're just starting out, having that firm foundation and that understanding, so that you're going to, as you move up, you're going to lose less touch on the finances, I feel like, because you're going to hire a full-time CFO, an operations manager, and those people are going to be talking about hiring the receptionist, as opposed to you're not going to have as much to do with that. And so if you have a firm understanding, you can then make those strategic hires of people that you trust. And that maybe some of the fear also is people are just scared of people stealing from them, because that, like letting confidants into that and all of that is because it's money. It's different than hiring a full-time marketing person, because they're not going to steal the money from you, but letting somebody into that finances. And so that's why I think just having that understanding from the beginning and educating yourself on it, so then as you grow and it gets more complex, you're understanding it, and you can hire people that will understand it as well.
Right. Okay, so kind of another big overarching question here is, if finance is the, unwanted piece of the triangle, how do you go about getting someone interested in finance? Or perhaps the better question is, how do we make finance fun?
Oh, man. Well, it's hard. I will say that my clients like to ignore me a lot of the time because I'm not their favorite person to talk to. But what makes it fun and what makes people want to be more involved is setting those goals and those dreams. And so there's a big thing, when you hear podcasts and talk to people and all that, is I don't like when people say, I want to make $3 million next year, because it's not about the $3 million. It's, what does that $3 million bring you? Does it bring you the ability to give back to your community? Does it give you more time at home with your family? Do you get to go on vacation? Do you get to, provide bonuses to your employees? It was never my money I gave as bonuses, but I will say I felt the joy. It got to the point where when I knew that employees under me were getting bonuses that would literally change their life for that month. It brought so much joy. And so, and that's my goal with like my firm as I grow it, is to be able to treat my employees in a way that I knew to be treated. And so what does that goal bring you? What does that $3 million bring you? Does it bring you the satisfaction of helping all of those clients? Because again, in the end, helping those clients, that's what you got into it to do. And so I think setting those goals is what can make the finance fun, is dreaming. What does a big firm get you other than piles of cash in the bank?
We all need some space and time to dream, for sure.
Yes. And that's what that gives you.
Okay, so one of the final questions I have is, you alluded to, setting up systems, all that type of stuff. What are some good habits that firm owners could establish starting today? Whether they're using a CFO, whether they're DIYing part of it, what are just some good habits that they could put in place to help themselves?
I think the biggest one, and this was, I was at a retreat with one of my clients last week with her firm, and we talked about bill hours, tracking your time. A lot of firms, I'm finding, like estate planning and things like that, are going to a flat fee schedule, which is great. I think there's way more value in that for the firm. to go flat fee. Personal injury, you obviously don't really have to track time. You're working on a contingency fee. But I think a really good thing for your financials is to track that time. Everybody's CRM system is so easy to track time now. You push a button when you start working on a client. And so that helps you really set those processes and see where the time is going. That helps you track those KPIs. That helps you set up processes for when somebody's out on vacation. What do they do all day? Like, do you know what your paralegal does all day?
Right.
So I think something that firms really need to get back to as we're getting away from the billable hour is tracking that time of where everybody's time is going and kind of framing it as, you're not checking up on your employees. You're not micromanaging them. I'm not a fan of that at all. But just setting up those processes and knowing where your time is going, because time is money in the end. So besides that and having just good accounting and bookkeeping, whether you do it on QuickBooks or in Excel or wherever it is, make sure that you have good accounting, especially if you have a trust account. Please, please, please use good accounting with your trust account.
Oh, yes.
People don't sometimes. So just look at that and get back to the basics. And I think you don't have to make the finance part of it overly complicated. You can get back to the basics of what money's coming in, where's it coming from, what money's going out, where is it going to specifically, and what do I have left over, and what are my goals, and where do I want that money to go. So
awesome. Okay, so I have you're going to be the first person, Leah, that I'm going to ask this regular set of questions to. I haven't prepared you for this at all. I promise they're easy, though. They're very easy. It's going to be just like, especially for someone who, I'm having a first conversation with, a good way to get to know you. But before we do those questions, if someone's interested in talking with you about finance, about fractional CFO, et cetera, how do they reach out to you?
I am on social media at LNM Financial. My website's lnmfinancial.com, and my email is Leah, Leah, at lnmfinancial.com. I will talk business with anybody, anytime.
Awesome.
Nobody in my personal life wants to talk about it. My husband's not into KPIs and stuff. So shoot me an email and I will, even if, you're not hiring me or anything like that, I'll talk to people about business. So.
Okay, so I have 3 questions for you. The first one is, what are you reading these days?
Oh, man. I am reading, what did I just read? I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so we'll call that reading. Profit First was a good one. What was the other one? Just a lot of business books because I'm learning the business side, some marketing stuff. I just bought a book about copywriting because I've been trying to do my own marketing and copywriting and things like that. I'm posting on LinkedIn every day, and I am not the creative. So most entrepreneurs are creatives, I am not the creative. And so I've been trying to consume a lot of information about that part of business.
That's okay. It just means that a lot of the creatives need people like you.
Yep. So
okay, so that's what you're reading. What are you watching these days?
I just started watching Suits on Netflix, which is an old one, and I was like, I really only watch TV when I'm folding laundry, and I needed something new to watch, and so that's what I turned on, was Suits on Netflix. And I don't know how accurate it is, but I'm like a legal law nerd, so I'll take it.
Perfect. And then the last question is, what are you listening to?
Podcasts. I listen to podcasts all day long. I did listen to yours about the 3 that you're talking about, the marketing and all of that.
Yes.
So just different business podcasts. That's, different ones about CFO and just anything I can get to, I just like to learn, increase my knowledge. So, but yeah, I have been listening to your podcast too. I like that one. So
good. I appreciate it. Make sure everyone who's listening, subscribe or follow is the term that they use on Apple Podcasts. It's a subscription. Subscribe to the show.
Yes.
It's all built on an RSS feed, which stands for really simple syndication. It's a subscriber thing. Sorry, that's just an extra rant here at the end for everyone else.
Nope, that's fine. I get it.
All right, Leah, thank you so much for being on the show. I
No
appreciate
problem. Thanks
you
for having me.
Yeah, sharing some financial wisdom. And again, if folks want to see what you do, it's lnmfinancial.com or check the show notes. And we will see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.